actually want to have a few conversations today. I don't intend sticking to any particular topic. And I'm not going to talk about the fourth industrial revolution. I'll touch on it. There's a lot of people in the audience that are far more qualified than I am in the fourth industrial revolution. But the question that I'm asking is, are we ready for the fifth industrial revolution? And I think that's something that we need to ponder on, just not as a community, and not necessarily just as a, whether it be a part of a community, but I think overall as the Ummah. Sorry. We're back into getting the first industrial revolution. So the question is, as an Ummah, how far have we gone? Where have we gone? What have we achieved? And the fundamental question is whether it's by design or default. Some of the ulama tell me it's by design or default. Whichever way we look at it, the question is whether we actually plan to be where we are as an Ummah. And there are certain fundamentals that we have to build, I believe, in this Ummah. And that's what I'm trying to get to today. So we'll touch on some of these subjects and topics. But first I'm going to start with who I am. I am a chartered accountant by trade. I studied part-time for many years, battled to pass my degree. And then I went to complete my university, my honors degree at Westworld, when my wife paid for my education. And I studied with people like Salim, for example, do my honors. My first corporate role was at Eskom. I keep saying this, it was in the glory days of Eskom, and we still produced power and we sold good power to the rest of the country and the continent. And alhamdulillah, I've been blessed to work in many entities and many roles in the last probably 20 years of my life, starting in retail, moving on to even to developing business intelligence software at some point. And I worked at, I've been in Transnet for the better part of about 13 years so far. And alhamdulillah, on the 1st of May this year, I was asked to help Transnet and step up to the new chief executive position. And some of you know me as presenting as one as well. So we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and sometimes I don't think we understand which one was the first, the second, the third. To get to the fourth, I want you to, this chart that we put up here talks about where we've come over a period of time. The first industrial revolution was largely the introduction of the steam engine. I think it was in 1780. That was when life as they knew it then changed. You had the second industrial revolution when we had Thomas Edison and the rest finding electricity in the light bulb, and you had the telephone, etc. But what I want you to understand is that we're talking about the 17th or 18th century, and the next industrial revolution comes 100 years later. And then between 1850, 1880 till about 1969 is again a lull, until we get the introduction of the microprocessor, and we talk about the man on the moon in 1969. The Apollo guidance system that was implemented or that was used to get Apollo 13 to the moon had less processing power than today's calculator. That's the processing speed. It had a 64 KB memory, and I think it was 0.004 kilowatts of processing speed. Then you come to the 70s and the 80s, but what you now see, you see a preponderance of activity in the fourth industrial revolution. The pace at which things are happening are significantly faster than they were 100 years ago. if you take 300 years ago in the 17th and 18th century, you had the steam engine, which became the focal point of the Industrial Revolution. You then had electricity and the telephone that became the focal point. Two things. Now we are talking about a multitude of inventions. They literally happen overnight. You go to sleep one night, you get up the next morning, something new is out. Some new technology is out. We're talking about the fifth industrial revolution. Why are we talking about the fifth industrial revolution? Very simply because the pace at which you're currently seeing technological improvement will bring about the fifth industrial revolution a lot sooner than you saw the timeline between the first, second, and third one. Those had 100-year gaps. We're now no longer talking about 100-year gaps. Today, as we speak, 265 million emails go out. My apologies, 265 billion emails go out every day. Billion. 75 trillion emails in a year. Go back 10 years or 20 years, and I'll show you just a 20-year view, not a 300 and a 400-year view. But if you look on the right-hand side, if you talk about our assessment 5 years ago, not 50 years ago, 5 years ago, the assessment on 3D printing was the yellow bars. 5 years later, the assessment of 3D printing is the blue bars. So we're not getting it right. Forget 100 years and 500 years and 200 years. We're talking about 5 years. If we look at the artificial intelligence software market, you can see the growth that's expected from 2016. You can see the growth. You look at anti-cybersecurity. Currently, if you talk to some of the biggest management consultants in the world, they'll tell you that the single greatest risk that governments face today is cybersecurity. Something that wasn't even 10 years ago, we didn't even talk about cybersecurity. We didn't have conversations about the technological space that we're in today. We spoke about, maybe we spoke about the Apple iPhone. But today, cybersecurity is a very significant threat to governments across the world and institutions. And we've seen some of the breaches of cybersecurity, whether it be how Facebook uses your data, or whether you look at credit card issues where simple things that have happened, where credit card information was hacked. When we talk about accelerating growth, and we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, one of the things that we in Africa don't tend to give it too much of credence because we say it will take a while before it gets here. But the rest of the world is moving around. If you take the Google car, for example, the Google car has now done about 3 million kilometers in test. It's had 2 incidents. We were fortunate to sit with some of the policy makers in the United States cabinet who said to us that they were spending a bulk of their budget in transport was on advancing the technology on the highway systems. So you know these road signs that we pass on our roads, if you look at going to the airport, the signs that tell you how long it will take you to get to a particular interchange. That road sign in the US is now talking to the car. As the car goes past it, it's downloading information. Alright? In time, that will be what you drive. The car will be without a driver, and the Google car is done, autonomous vehicles are done. There's no issues about them, but what are the key issues that keep them from the roads? Safety. They're safer than you driving and me driving, because it will be the first time you can blame somebody else. Right? Anybody? Policies. Yeah. The first one is insurance. The insurance industry haven't wrapped their mind around who is insured. Is it you because you're not driving the vehicle? Are they going to sue the software company? Because there's no actual vehicle manufacturer. There'll be a software company behind the vehicle. Those are some of the challenges that the policymakers are facing at the moment, amongst many. The one big problem is you won't face hijacking, but you face hacking. They're actually concerned about cars being hacked, not being hijacked. So somebody will be sitting somewhere in Durban stealing your vehicle. And he's not even here, but he may steal it with you inside. That's the problem. They'll hack your vehicle, or they'll direct that vehicle to go to where they want it to go. But these are some of the challenges that we're talking about today. What's the landscape of business? So when you look at 1955, on the Fortune 500, this is now the supposed, when you look at market capitalization, the top 500 companies, today only 60 remain from that 500. Only 60 of the top 500 companies from 1955 remain. And it's because of disruptive innovation or disruptive technology. That's really, they talk about creative destruction. So we have to think about this differently. And I'll get to where I really want to be, but I just want to show you some of this. Airbnb saw common stock just recently in March, which put their value of the company at $35 billion. Some say it's valued at $69 billion. Depends who you talk to. There's a couple of things about Airbnb. They don't own a single asset. They own nothing. They probably own technology. So what's $60 billion? A company that owns nothing. This is something that is not within our realms of thinking, because we've come up with a perspective of having bricks and mortar. That's where your value is. So how's a company worth $60 billion if it owns nothing? Well, let me tell you something. One of the things now, they say blockchain is going to disrupt Airbnb. Meaning that Airbnb in your lifetime, you'll see the birth of Airbnb and you'll see the death of Airbnb in your lifetime. Something that also from a time perspective was not necessarily things that we contemplated. If you go back and you think about 50 years ago, people thought companies would last years, they would last generations. We've seen companies being created and having deaths in the same generation. Now if you look at 1999 versus 2019, and you ask yourself, you look at these, and you think about the top two is auto industry. Walmart is in the top 20 at the time. ExxonMobil, which is gas, oil and gas. General Electric is a conglomerate that goes from cars, it goes up to trains, bridges, and even airplane engines. Citigroup is a financial institution. IBM, we all know IBM, or we've heard of IBM. Boeing. But now when we go into the current top 20 in the Fortune 500, you have Walmart, you have ExxonMobil, you have Apple. Something that didn't exist, something that wasn't even contemplated 20 years ago as being a top entity in the Fortune 500. Amazon. There's an interesting story about Amazon. You know, Jeff Bezos was divorced recently, and he gave 50% of Amazon to his wife in the divorce settlement, but that's not for anybody to take home. But when you look at pharma and healthcare in terms of McKesson, CVS, and even Amerisource, this is not selling pharmaceuticals. This is being technologically advanced in pharmacare and healthcare. This is where they've got an edge, and they've got first mover advantage over their competitors, and that's why they've suddenly featured in the top 20. And these are worth hundreds of billions. But it tells you that there's a creative disruption that's going to happen, and it's going to continue happening. When you started with open source in Microsoft, previously Microsoft used to be closed source, and then they lost certain lawsuits in Europe and in the United States. And that started opening up a very different perspective in technology. The question is what next, right? Because today we talk about nanotechnology, and by the way, you know, there's certain individuals in South Africa, amongst them some Muslims, who are at the cusp of nanotechnology in medication. Right, where they want to put into a capsule a kind of a robot that when you swallow it will go to exactly the organ of the body that needs it. It's happening. It's happening. The sooner we realize that it's happening, the better for all of us. But most important, it's critical for our generation that's to come. Because if our generation to come is not prepared for what has to happen, then they're going to go into the fields of law and accounting and medicine from the perspectives of what our grandfathers and great-grandfathers did, which is a problem for me. I'm giving you my view. That's why I'm here to chat to you about these things. SpaceX. I mean, one of the top 5 programs that people are talking about in 2030 to 2050 actually. What would be the top 5 jobs that would be on hand at the time? One is a commercial space pilot. The other is a revivalist. A revivalist. The other is an organ creator. These are some of them. We're talking about things that we don't necessarily appreciate or understand today. But by the way, if we go back to us with grayer beards than others, we also don't appreciate or didn't think about the cell phones 25 years ago. But today we can't live without them. And you wonder simple things like funeral messages, how they got to the masses in the old days. Because today we wait for the WhatsApp from the certain burial trusts or whatever it is. But this is technology that we've taken into our homes and we've taken it as though it's been there for life. It hasn't been there for life. It's a technology that is developing as we go through. So we just put some of the issues, Tesla, the vehicles that they put in electric cars. These are things that are way out into a very different sphere than we've established and imagined in the past. It's just a view from my side. I want you to watch this little video. Take a minute. You may have seen this one. You've got to notice what's happening with different entities. Some of them are falling off the charts and some are exceeding all expectations. Apple today is worth $900 billion. If you go back and you watch this at some other point, you'll realize that about 10 years ago, Apple was worth $11 billion. We're not focusing on the market capitalization, but we're talking about technology. We're talking about the various fields of technology and how companies have actually accelerated. If you look at Microsoft, it was the only entity that most people knew. There's a whole story around Microsoft and how Microsoft actually grew, because all that Microsoft did was they developed the software, and then they went to equipment manufacturers and they said, you will install Microsoft on it. And if you think about Microsoft in the many years ago, you started with Microsoft DOS. And DOS was a dirty operating system. Am I right? Huh? Close. So, how has that moved? And how that has transformed and transitioned itself? But Apple came along from nowhere, Amazon from nowhere. Google, when I say nowhere, meaning it came literally from somebody's garage. And we can sit and talk about the companies like Google and Yahoo, where they came from. So the question is whether individually, collectively, as communities, as a ummah, are we ready? I sit, alhamdulillah, at a company that is 55,000 people strong. The challenge I have is that in the top 200 of Transnet, we are only 2 Muslims. 2. And the question is why? And I think that is what we need to ponder and reflect on. I will touch on a few things, some of them controversial. For those of you that know me, I am controversial. So, the question is whether the youth's head is in the game. You go and talk to people in universities and you hear, particularly of the generation that's currently in university. We used to have it in our days. I didn't go to university. I only went in to do my honors. But we hear that people are in third year socially and first year academically. Because they've gone to varsity for 3 years, but they're still doing first year courses. There seems to be, in my humble opinion, a lack of focus on education. And education, in my humble opinion, regardless of where you want to be, because in the world we require, as much as we require the ulama, we require the dentist, the doctor, the lawyers, the professionals. And we don't seem to want to be the best at our game. For some reason, mediocrity in our community is acceptable. When I say this, I say it with respect. We haven't focused on looking at things as being great, because we tend to think that that's arrogance. I'll touch on the difference, in my opinion, on arrogance and confidence. But we tend to think and we tend to speak along the lines of good is good enough. In this current world, good is not good enough. Allah has blessed every one of us with a brain that we have to exercise, that we have to use to the best of its capability. If we're not using it to the best of its capability, then we are taken an entrusted asset and not utilizing it. It's like a person who buys a Ferrari and says, well, I know Ferrari comes with certain, I don't have one, but I believe that it comes with certain kilometers, mileage constraints. But your mind doesn't. But it's like that individual who wants to buy a Ferrari and say, well, I'll park it in the garage and every now and then I'll just switch it on, rev it, and I'll feel good that I got it. That's the same in which we utilize our intelligence at the moment. It's as though we don't stretch ourselves. It's as though we haven't taught our youth to think great, not good. We haven't taught them to be confident. We speak of humility without talking of confidence. And I'll touch on all of that, in my view, what I believe is from a Sharia perspective. One of the things that I pick up is that people have studied and become, whatever profession they followed, it's sometimes not necessarily what their passions are and their purpose, what they believe their purpose is. If I talk to grade 12s today, the first thing I ask them is, so what do you want to do? And most of them respond with, I don't know yet. It's quite fascinating if you're on the cusp of going into your second or third tier of education, you still don't know what you want to do. It's either you're confused because somebody is telling you what they think you should do, or you haven't figured out what your purpose and passion is. Because if you haven't figured out your passion and your purpose, remember every day you're going to go to work and you're going to hate it. And for the doctors in the room, it's not directed to them, but I know of an individual who studied 7 years and then said, this is not what I want. This is not my passion. But how much of time are we taking with the youth to ask them what their passion is? To understand their passion. Because that is what will drive greatness. That is what will drive you to perform every day at 110%. Every day. Not one morning, not 2 mornings out of 7, not 5 out of 7. 7 out of 7 you go with 120% into what you do. Because that's lacking today. That is lacking. So my perspective is that we have to drive the right passion in the youth. We have to bring out the right passion in the youth. Otherwise, they go on for a long period of time in a particular job and then realize that I'm not in the right space. And some of what we're talking about, it's taken us at the age, that, when we get to 40, we've learned these things. If we can teach our children that today, pursue your passion, we get a lot more out of them than probably what we got out of life as well. And our kids today have got no complaints. They should have no complaints because they have at their fingertips everything that we never had. They have technology at their fingertips. Alhamdulillah, some of them go to the best schools there, the best universities there. We today as a community are probably more affluent than any community before us. And I'm not talking about, we talk about Al-Usman in a very different perspective, but outwardly, and if you look at the masses, we're probably at an affluence level that is probably the highest in this country. But yet, we are not the captains of industry. And that's what we need to ponder about. That's what we need to think about. The question I ask is, are we ready to lead? And the reason I ask this question is because leadership is fundamentally different to status. In our communities today, we tend to look up to people who are holding certain statuses and titles in organizations. That's not leadership. And the question is whether we've even understood the basics of leadership. And I say this because as you grow in an organization, in the corporate world, if you grow, your ability to have the right intelligence quotient becomes irrelevant. I stand before you as an accountant, but I'm tasked with a company that is highly technical. It's an engineering entity. We have to know how to run trains, we have to know how to run ships, the ports, the tugs, the cranes. We have to know how the fuel moves through the pipeline and what solvent is needed to be used. And nothing in my accounting background taught me this. In fact, if you're an accountant, it taught you nothing except A is equal to something, I don't even remember that equation. But the question is, are we ready to lead? And how much have we taught our kids to be good and great leaders? What we tend to do is when somebody has an opinion, we say he's got a big mouth, or she's got a big mouth. We don't harness the skill. If somebody has a questioning mind, we say they being inquisitive, or they back-chatting, or we don't harness the skill. And I say this as adults to us as parents, because there's a book which I'll give out to some selected people that talk about the leader who had no title. All right? This is by a gentleman named Robin Sharma. You may have heard of him. He wrote a book called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. A man who was an attorney at the top of his game and decided that was not what he was passionate about. Sold his Ferrari, sold his house, and decided to find himself. Whatever I say to you, I want you to take it in the context of why I'm here, not walk out of here thinking that I may have been presumptuous or arrogant in what I say. I was fortunate enough to attend a program for many weeks in Switzerland. Transnet had sent me on a development program. And the number of individuals that come back from that program, it's not a local program, that leave that program, go back to their hometowns and resign from their employment. In fact, one company refused to send executives to the development program because they said every time the executives come back, they resign. It's an executive development program that's focused on strategic management. Yet 55% of the program is built on self-awareness. I'll tie all of this together because when you look at Quran and you look at the teachings, it talks about tasawwuf, which is about self-reflection, self-development. Nothing I tell you and nothing that I was taught was contrary to Sharia principles, in my view. You find that you go through these programs that help you find yourself first. In the old days, we were told there's no I in team. Today, they tell us without an I, there's no team. Why? Because if the I is crooked, the team is cooking. These are the teachings that have changed over time. We talk about IQ. That's what we were looked at, not AQ, IQ. IQ. When you were growing up, you wanted to get into the teacher's mark book to look at your IQ because that was what the world placed emphasis on. Yep. It's about your emotional intelligence. Sorry, your intellectual quotient, not your emotional. It was about whether you were academically astute. So the child that at the time went and decided to do something in the arts was frowned upon. It was looked upon as, what are you doing with an arts degree? There'll be a time when you will kiss the feet of your child if he does arts, because the creative thinking is what is being looked at in the world today. They are looking for those kids that have the ability to think outside the box. Yeah? How does this all fit in from a deen perspective? Because I think that's one thing that always leaves a lot of us perplexed. So I think my perspective is that you must have foundational requirements. You have to steep yourself in certain things. The first is that you must keep your feet on the ground. You must be on terra firma. Because if you're not on terra firma, you have a problem. When you float away into a world that is outside of your capability in thinking, that is when you start creating challenges for yourself. I call them the non-negotiables of deen and your religion, whatever you follow. Because at the end of the day, you cannot be wavering in your principles. One of the things I've learned is, and my father was a very good teacher of this, he actually taught me two things. One is be principled, and the second is have the highest level of integrity. Those are two non-negotiables in his life. Amongst the farais of deen, these were two non-negotiables in his life. And if he felt that something didn't adhere to his principles, he didn't act on it. Whether it be attend the wedding or whatever it is, if it wasn't within his principles, goodbye, he didn't follow that. But today what I find is that we tend to be flip-flops. There's a president in one country that's regarded as a flip-flop as well. But the decisions change every day. So one day somebody says this and we say, yes, he's right. And the next day somebody says that and we say, yes, he's right. Two people can't be right on fundamentally opposed issues. You've got to take the ground that says, I apologize to you, but you're wrong on these principles. Integrity is something that should not be even a question in a Muslim's life. We should be beyond reproach. We should never ever have the situation where somebody says something about a Muslim and then we start questioning whether it's possibly true, that the person was involved in corruption, bribery, fraud, etc. One key thing that I believe is something that's missing is that people think that, you know, I'll become a doctor and I can't do anything to Allah's deen. Or I will be a lawyer and I can't do anything for Allah's deen. I don't know if you hear where I'm coming from. And this is what I'm asking is that every single individual, whether they're studying IT or whether they want to study actuarial science or they want to become the best doctors they are, there is a space in our religion for you to help this religion. So somebody the other day asked me about becoming an actuarial scientist and saying that, well, there's certain individuals who believe that it's not permissible to be an actuarial scientist, etc. And I said, well, my personal opinion is that I don't think that's true because we need an actuarial scientist to come up with an Islamic medical aid. We need actuarial scientists to come up with Islamic insurance. We need actuarial scientists to come up with the concepts of Islamic finance. Because these are not very simple concepts, by the way. We were sitting one day and a colleague of mine who was quite well read, he made a statement in a gathering that my Prophet said, and it was a mixed gathering with quite a few people. He said, My Prophet said that it's not permissible to trade in derivatives. Now, I was also surprised. And the guy next to him said, well, when did your Prophet come? So he said, 1400 years ago. So he said he knew about derivatives, because derivatives is something that came up in the last 20 odd years. I mean, it's been there, but it... So he said, yes, he knew about it. So he said, how did he know about it? He said, well, let me tell you the story. Two companions of the Prophet are walking with the Prophet in the center. They look up. There's an orchard in front, a date orchard in front. One Sahabi says to the other, that's a beautiful orchard. He says, that belongs to me. He said, the dates on the tree look absolutely beautiful. He said, Alhamdulillah. So the Sahabi said, I will buy your orchard in its entirety when the harvest happens. And the Prophet of Allah stood back and he said to him, that is not permissible. You are buying something on a future event. You can't. That's a derivative.